You know when you read something, an argument so convincing, so perfectly built, that it almost feels like a magic trick? Well, it's not magic. Turns out there's a blueprint, a hidden structure inside the most persuasive arguments you'll ever encounter. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain. Let's kick things off with a story that shows just how powerful this blueprint really is. To really get this, we're going to travel to one of the absolute driest places on the planet. A place where a simple story about, of all things, fog shows us everything we need to know about what makes an idea work or what makes it completely fall apart. It kind of sounds like a riddle, right? But for the people living in Chile's Atacama Desert, this was no riddle. This was a real-world life or death question. And the answer they found was supposed to change everything. Okay, so picture this. We're in these little coastal villages in Atacama. And for as long as anyone can remember, they've had this chronic, just crippling lack of water. This is our starting point, what we call the situation. It's a pretty bleak picture where a basic need like water seems like an impossible ask. But here is the wild part. The land was bone dry, sure, but the air was full of water. Almost every day, this thick, heavy fog would roll in from the ocean. So the water was right there, you could feel it on your skin, but it was just untouchable. The solution they came up with was just beautiful in its simplicity. They decided they were going to literally harvest the fog. They stretched these huge mesh nets up on the hillsides, right in the fog's path. And as the wet air passed through, little droplets would collect on the mesh, they'd get bigger, and then drip, drip, drip down into these troughs that piped fresh water straight to the villages. Genius, right? And for a while, it was a massive success. I mean, it worked. The system was bringing them clean, fresh water that was way, way cheaper than trucking it in. For a moment there, it really looked like they'd solved an impossible problem with this incredibly elegant idea. And here's the twist in the story. After all that, after it worked so well, the whole system was eventually abandoned. The nets started to tear, the pipes ran dry. So the really interesting question isn't, did the technology work? It's, why did it stop working? We're going to come back to that. Because the answer to that question and the real lesson of this whole story is found in that blueprint we talked about. So it's time to lay it all out. You see, the story about the fog collectors is so gripping because it naturally follows this classic structure. In academic circles, they call it a problem-solution text. But really, it's just a way of laying out your thinking that builds a case piece by piece, making your argument feel incredibly insightful and ultimately really hard to disagree with. And here it is, the blueprint itself, just 4 parts. First, you set the situation. Remember the dry Atacama Desert? Then you pinpoint the exact problem, the water shortage. Next, you introduce the solution, which for them was the fog-catching nets. And then, and this is the most important step of all, you give an evaluation of that solution. And that's where our story got really interesting. So let's zoom in on that third step for a second, describing the solution. How do you explain a process, like the fog catchers, in a way that sounds clear and authoritative, like you really know what you're talking about? Well, if you look at how it was written up, you see language like this. Large mesh nets are installed. Fog droplets are collected. Water then drips. Pipes deliver it. Did you catch that? Notice the language being used? It's very direct, almost sterile. It's all about the process, not the people doing it. And that is a very deliberate choice. That choice is something called the passive voice. And as our source material explains, when you write, the nets were installed, instead of, say, a team of engineers installed the nets, you're making a strategic move. You're keeping the reader's focus on the action, on the what, not on the who. So, you know how your English teacher might have told you to never use the passive voice? Well, they weren't entirely right. In technical writing, it's actually a crucial tool. It lets you sound objective and keeps your reader focused on the method itself. But, as we're about to see, focusing only on the method and forgetting about the people can have some pretty huge consequences. And that brings us right back to our story's cliffhanger and to that last vital piece of the framework, the evaluation. So why exactly did this brilliant solution fail? This is why the evaluation is everything. On one hand, the project was a total technical success. The nets and pipes, they worked perfectly. But on the other hand, it was a complete social failure. And a really strong argument, a truly honest one, has to look at both. The evaluation isn't just about, did the machine turn on? It's about, did the solution actually work for the people it was for? So what went wrong? It was a domino effect, really. The promise of water made the village's population triple, which put a huge strain on the supply. And because there was no clear plan for who owned the nets or who would maintain them, the community's commitment just fizzled out. And in the end, people decided they'd rather just ask the government to build a regular old water pipeline. And that is exactly what makes the evaluation stage the most powerful part of this whole blueprint. Anyone can say, here's the problem, here's the solution. But a truly persuasive argument goes deeper. It has the confidence to critically look at that solution. To celebrate the wins, sure, but also to honestly point out the limitations and the messy, complicated, real-world results. So, there you have it. You've seen the blueprint in action. We took a simple story about fog and used this framework to turn it into a masterclass in critical thinking. The only question now is, how do you use it? This is it. Your takeaway, the 4 steps to a rock-solid argument. First, set the situation so everyone's on the same page. Then, define the problem to show why it matters. Next, clearly describe your solution. And finally, the step that makes all the difference. Deliver a tough, honest evaluation of how it all turned out. And please remember, this is so much more than a writing formula for a school paper. It's a way of thinking. It's a framework for making your case, whether you're pitching a new idea at work, trying to get funding for a project, or even just trying to win an argument at the dinner table. It gives your ideas structure, logic, and power. So, now you have the blueprint. The only thing left to ask is, what problem are you gonna solve?